The sound of my 16-year-old son's palm connecting with my cheek echoed through our dining room like a gunshot, silencing every conversation around our Thanksgiving table. 23 family members turned to stare as the sting spread across my face, but instead of tears or anger, something unexpected happened. I smiled. Not a bitter smile, not a sarcastic one, but a genuine, knowing smile that seemed to drain all the fury from Daniel's eyes in an instant. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. He stepped back, his hand still raised, confusion replacing the rage that had consumed him just seconds before. That smile held 5 years of secrets, pain, and a truth so devastating that it would change everything he thought he knew about our family. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and until that Thanksgiving, afternoon in 2023, I thought I had successfully buried the most shameful chapter of my life. I had spent years crafting the perfect image of our family, building a foundation of lies so carefully constructed that even I sometimes forgot where the truth ended and the fiction began. But the thing about secrets is that they have a way of clawing their way to the surface, especially when you least expect them to. The story really begins 7 years earlier, in the spring of 2016, when I was 32 years old and working as a marketing coordinator for a small tech startup in Portland, Oregon. I had been married to my husband Michael for 8 years, and we had been trying to have a baby for the last 3 of those years. Month after month of disappointment had taken its toll on our marriage. The fertility treatments, the scheduled intimacy, the constant hope followed by crushing disappointment had created a chasm between us that neither of us knew how to bridge. Michael worked long hours as an accountant, often staying late at the office or bringing work home on weekends. Our conversations had dwindled to discussions about grocery lists, bill payments, and doctor's appointments. The spontaneous laughter that had once filled our small house had been replaced by a careful politeness that felt more like living with a roommate than a husband. We were both drowning in our separate pools of grief, but neither of us knew how to reach out to the other. That spring, my company hired a new creative director named James Thompson. He was everything Michael wasn't, confident where my husband was cautious, outgoing where Michael was reserved, passionate about his work where Michael seemed to merely endure his. James had recently moved to Portland from San Francisco after his divorce, and there was something about his easy smile and genuine interest in others that drew people to him like moths to a flame. I told myself that my growing friendship with James was innocent. We would grab coffee together to discuss projects, stay late to work on campaigns, and occasionally meet for drinks after particularly stressful days. He listened when I talked about my frustrations with the fertility treatments, offering a sympathetic ear that I hadn't realized I desperately needed. Unlike Michael, who seemed to shut down whenever the topic of our childlessness came up, James encouraged me to talk through my feelings without judgment. The first time James kissed me was on a rainy Thursday evening in May. We had been working late on a presentation for a major client, and the office was empty except for us. I had been feeling particularly low that day because my period had started. That morning, marking another failed cycle of treatments, when James found me crying quietly in the break room, he sat beside me and pulled me into a comforting embrace. What started as consolation slowly transformed into something else entirely. I should have stopped it there. I should have pulled away, gone home to my husband, and worked on fixing what was broken in my marriage. Instead, I kissed him back, tasting the coffee on his lips and feeling more alive than I had in months. When we finally broke apart, both of us were breathing hard, and I saw my own confusion and desire reflected in his dark eyes. The affair that followed was unlike anything I had ever experienced. James made me feel beautiful and desired in ways that Michael never had, even in the early days of our relationship. With James, I wasn't the broken woman who couldn't give her husband children. I was simply Sarah, interesting and worthy of passion and attention. We were careful, meeting at his apartment across town or in hotels when we traveled for work conferences. I became an expert at creating believable excuses for my absences, spinning elaborate lies about working late or visiting friends. For 3 months, I lived a double life. During the day, I was the devoted wife trying to conceive, going through the motions of fertility treatments, and maintaining the facade of a happy marriage. But several evenings a week, and most weekends when Michael was working, I was with James, losing myself in a relationship that felt more real than anything else in my life. The guilt was crushing, but it was overshadowed by the intoxicating feeling of being truly wanted. James would tell me I was beautiful, while tracing the lines of my body with his fingers. He would listen to my dreams about the marketing agency I wanted to start someday and encourage me to take risks that Michael always counseled against. With James, I felt like the woman I had been before years of disappointment had worn me down to a shadow of myself. Everything changed on a Wednesday morning in August when I realized my period was late. At first, I dismissed it as stress, something that had happened occasionally during our fertility journey. But as the days passed and my body began to feel different, a terrible possibility began to take shape in my mind. I bought a pregnancy test on my lunch break, hiding it in my purse like contraband. That evening, while Michael was at his weekly poker game with his friends, I sat on the bathroom floor and watched 2 pink lines appear on the test strip. After 3 years of trying, I was finally pregnant. The irony was so brutal it took my breath away. The baby I had desperately wanted with my husband had been conceived with another man. I spent the next week in a fog of panic and confusion. I calculated dates obsessively, trying to determine if there was any possibility that Michael could be the father. The timing was close enough that it might be possible, but deep in my heart, I knew the truth. The passionate encounters with James had occurred during my most fertile time of the month, while my intimate moments with Michael had become so infrequent and mechanical that I could remember each one specifically. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The rational part of my brain screamed that I needed to end the affair immediately and tell Michael about the pregnancy. Maybe we could be happy, even if the child wasn't biologically his. But every time I tried to imagine that conversation, I pictured the look of devastation that would cross his face when he learned about my betrayal. Michael was a good man who deserved better than a wife who had cheated on him during the darkest period of their marriage. Instead, I made a decision that would haunt me for years to come. I decided to let Michael believe the baby was his and end my relationship with James without telling him the truth either. It seemed like the kindest option for everyone involved, though I would later understand that kindness built on deception is the cruelest gift of all. Breaking up with James was one of the hardest things I had ever done. I met him at our usual coffee shop on a Sunday afternoon and told him that I couldn't continue our relationship because I was pregnant with Michael's baby. The lie came easily, perhaps because I wanted so desperately for it to be true. James congratulated me with genuine warmth, though I could see the hurt in his eyes as he realized what this meant for us. He quit his job 2 weeks later, citing a desire to return to California. We had one final conversation in the parking garage after his last day of work. He held my hands and told me that what we had shared was real, even if it couldn't continue. Then he kissed my forehead and walked out of my life forever, not knowing that he was leaving behind more than just memories. Michael's reaction to the pregnancy news was everything I had hoped for and more. The man who had been distant and preoccupied for months suddenly became the attentive husband I remembered from our early years together. He cried when I showed him the positive test, holding me close and whispering apologies for how disconnected we had become. The pregnancy seemed to breathe new life into our marriage, giving us a shared purpose and hope for the future. The next 9 months were simultaneously the happiest and most guilt-ridden of my life. Michael transformed into the perfect expectant father, reading pregnancy books, attending every doctor's appointment, and preparing our spare bedroom as a nursery with meticulous care. He would talk to my growing belly each night, telling our unborn child about the adventures they would have together and how much he loved them already. Meanwhile, I was consumed by anxiety about what would happen when the baby was born. Would the child look like James? Would Michael notice features that didn't match either of our families? I spent hours studying photos of Michael and myself, trying to memorize our features and imagine how they might combine in our child. Every ultrasound appointment filled me with dread as much as excitement, terrified that somehow the truth would be revealed. Daniel was born on a snowy February morning after 14 hours of labor. The moment the doctor placed him in my arms, my world shifted on its axis. He was perfect, with a full head of dark hair and the most beautiful brown eyes I had ever seen. But even through the haze of exhaustion and overwhelming love, I could see that he looked nothing like Michael, whose sandy hair and blue eyes were so different from our son's darker features. If Michael noticed the discrepancy, he never mentioned it. He was completely smitten with Daniel from the first moment, staying up all night during those early weeks so I could rest, changing diapers without complaint, and singing lullabies in his slightly off-key voice that somehow soothed our son better than anything else. Watching them together filled me with both intense joy and crushing guilt. Michael was such a devoted father that the deception felt even more unbearable. As Daniel grew, the resemblance to James became more pronounced. He had James's strong jawline, his expressive eyebrows, and the same way of tilting his head when he was thinking. Several people commented on how different Daniel looked from both Michael and me, usually followed by remarks about how genetics could be surprising or how he must take after some distant relative. I became expert at deflecting these observations with nervous laughter and quick changes of subject. The guilt was a constant companion, growing heavier with each passing year. I would watch Michael teaching Daniel to ride a bike, or helping him with homework, and feel sick with the knowledge of what I was keeping from both of them. There were moments when I almost confessed, particularly during our happiest family times when the weight of the lie felt unbearable. But then I would imagine the destruction that the truth would bring, and I would swallow the words before they could escape. Michael and I rebuilt our marriage around our love for Daniel. We went to counseling to work through the issues that had driven us apart during our fertility struggles, though I could never be completely honest about my own role in our problems. We learned to communicate better, to make time for each other, and to nurture the partnership that had gotten lost in our desperation to become parents. In many ways, we were happier than we had ever been, but the foundation of our renewed relationship was built on my deception. Daniel grew into a bright, curious child with an artistic temperament that puzzled both Michael and me. Neither of us had any particular talent for drawing or music, yet Daniel showed an early aptitude for both. His kindergarten teacher recommended advanced art classes, and by elementary school, he was winning local competitions for his paintings and sculptures. When people asked where his talent came from, I would joke that he must be a genetic throwback, never mentioning that James had been a gifted artist before moving into creative direction. The years passed peacefully enough, with the secret buried so deeply that sometimes I could almost forget it existed. Daniel excelled in school, Michael earned several promotions at his accounting firm, and I eventually started the marketing consultancy I had dreamed about. We moved to a larger house in a better neighborhood, took family vacations to national parks, and settled into the comfortable rhythms of middle-class family life. But secrets have a way of festering beneath the surface, even when they seem safely buried. As Daniel entered his teenage years, he began asking more questions about family history and genetics. A biology unit on heredity in 9th grade sparked his curiosity about why he looked so different from both of his parents. He started making jokes about being adopted, laughing as he pointed out that he was the only person in our extended family with dark hair and brown eyes. The jokes weren't Mean-spirited, but they cut deep every time. Michael would ruffle Daniel's hair and tease him about being their mystery child, completely unaware of how close to the truth he was coming. I learned to smile and laugh along, but inside I was dying a little more each time the subject came up. The real crisis began during Daniel's sophomore year of high school when he became obsessed with genealogy. A class project required students to create detailed family trees, and Daniel threw himself into the assignment with typical enthusiasm. He interviewed elderly relatives, collected old photographs, and even convinced Michael to submit DNA samples to one of those ancestry websites so they could trace their genetic heritage. When the DNA results came back showing no genetic relationship between Michael and Daniel, my carefully constructed world began to crumble. The website listed their relationship as not biologically related, a cold clinical phrase that destroyed 16 years of lies in an instant. Daniel brought the results to Michael first, confused and seeking explanation for what seemed like an obvious error. I was in the kitchen preparing dinner when I heard Michael's sharp intake of breath from the living room. "Sarah," he called, his voice strange and tight. "Can you come here, please?" The tone made my blood run cold, and I knew before I even saw the papers in his trembling hands that our secret was finally out. The conversation that followed was the most devastating of my life. Michael's face went through a series of expressions as the truth sank in. Confusion giving way to hurt, then anger, then a kind of hollow devastation that was worse than rage. Daniel sat between us on the couch, looking back and forth as we spoke, in the careful, euphemistic language that adults use when trying to protect children from uncomfortable truths. But Daniel wasn't a child anymore. He was 16 years old and intelligent enough to understand exactly what the DNA results meant. When Michael finally asked me directly if he was Daniel's biological father, I could no longer lie. The no that escaped my lips was barely a whisper, but it echoed through our living room like a shout. The silence that followed was deafening. Michael stared at me with eyes that no longer held any trace of the love I had taken for granted for so many years. Daniel's face cycled through confusion, realization, and then a hurt so deep it made my chest ache. In that moment, I understood that my years of protecting them from the truth had only made the eventual revelation more painful. Michael left that night, gathering some clothes and staying at his brother's house while we all tried to process what had been revealed. Daniel locked himself in his room, refusing to speak to me despite my repeated attempts to explain or apologize. The house that had been filled with laughter and conversation for 16 years suddenly felt like a mausoleum, quiet except for the sound of my own crying. The next few days passed in a blur of difficult conversations and painful discoveries. Michael hired a lawyer, not because he wanted to divorce me immediately, but because he needed to understand his legal rights and responsibilities regarding Daniel. Despite everything, his love for the boy he had raised from birth was unchanged, but he needed time to work through his feelings about our marriage. Daniel's reaction was more complex and ultimately more heartbreaking. The teenager who had always been close to both of his parents suddenly felt like he didn't belong anywhere. He was angry with me for lying, hurt that Michael might not be his real father, and confused about his own identity in ways I had never anticipated. The confident, artistic boy I knew disappeared, replaced by someone angry and lost. I tried to explain my reasons for keeping the secret, but my words felt hollow even to my own ears. How could I make a 16-year-old understand the desperation and fear that had driven my choices? How could I explain that I had thought I was protecting everyone when all I had really done was delay the inevitable pain? The weeks that followed were the darkest of my life. Michael moved back home but slept in the guest room, and our interactions were polite but distant. Daniel alternated between ignoring me completely and lashing out with cutting remarks about honesty and trust. The family dinners that had once been highlights of our day became tense, uncomfortable affairs where we all pretended everything was normal while our world fell apart around us. I threw myself into work, staying late at the office and taking on new clients to avoid the atmosphere at home. But even professional success felt meaningless when my personal life was in ruins. I had spent years building a life based on a lie, and now that the truth was out, I didn't know how to rebuild from the wreckage. The decision to track down James didn't come easily. For weeks, I resisted the idea, telling myself that involving him would only make things more complicated. But as I watched Daniel struggle with questions about his biological heritage and identity, I realized that he deserved to know the truth about where he came from. Michael agreed, somewhat reluctantly, that Daniel had the right to meet his biological father if he wanted to. Finding James took longer than expected. He had changed jobs twice since leaving Portland and had moved from California to Colorado. When I finally located him through professional networking sites, I spent days crafting the email that would turn his life upside down just as thoroughly as Daniel's had been disrupted. The message I eventually sent was simple and direct. He had a 16-year-old son who wanted to meet him. James's response came within hours. He was married now, with 2 daughters from his new relationship, but he agreed to meet with Daniel and answer any questions he might have. The man who flew to Portland 2 weeks later was recognizably the same person I had fallen in love with 7 years earlier, though he carried himself with the confidence of someone who had found peace in his life. The meeting between James and Daniel was arranged at a neutral location, a coffee shop downtown where they could talk privately while I waited nearby. I watched through the window as my son met his biological father for the first time, seeing the immediate recognition in both their faces as they noticed their shared features. The conversation lasted for 3 hours, and when Daniel finally emerged, he looked more at peace than he had since learning the truth. James was kind and respectful throughout the process, answering Daniel's questions honestly while being careful not to criticize the choices I had made. He explained that he hadn't known about Daniel's existence and that he bore no ill will toward anyone involved. He also made it clear that while he was happy to maintain contact with Daniel, he had no intention of trying to replace Michael as the boy's father. That conversation marked the beginning of a slow healing process for our family. Michael and I started couples counseling, working through the betrayal and lies with the help of a professional therapist. It wasn't easy, and there were many sessions where we both left feeling worse than when we arrived, but gradually we began to understand each other's perspectives and pain. Daniel started seeing his own counselor, a specialist in adolescent issues, who helped him work through his anger and confusion about his identity. He also began maintaining regular contact with James, visiting him in Colorado during school breaks, and staying in touch through phone calls and video chats. Rather than creating more division in our family, this relationship seemed to help Daniel feel more complete and settled. The healing wasn't linear or simple. There were setbacks and difficult days when old hurts resurfaced. Michael struggled, with feeling deceived and wondering what other secrets I might be keeping. Daniel went through periods of anger toward me for keeping such a significant secret for so long. I battled with guilt and shame, questioning every decision I had made over the past 16 years. But slowly, gradually, we found our way back to each other. Michael and I renewed our wedding vows on our 20th anniversary, not because we wanted to forget the past, but because we had learned to forgive it. Daniel graduated from high school with honors and was accepted to several art schools on scholarship, his talent having blossomed even more as he gained confidence in his identity. Which brings us back to that Thanksgiving afternoon in 2023, 3 years after the truth had first come out. We had invited both sides of the family for dinner, including James, who had become a regular part of our holiday celebrations. It was a large, boisterous gathering with my parents, Michael's siblings and their families, and James with his wife and daughters who had become like extended family to Daniel. The conversation at dinner had turned to family traditions and the importance of honesty in relationships. My mother, who never could resist making pointed comments, had begun talking about how wonderful it was that our family had learned to work through difficulties together. She was clearly proud of how we had handled the situation, but her praise felt a bit too pointed. a bit too public for the setting. That's when Daniel, who had been unusually quiet throughout the meal, suddenly looked up from his plate with fire in his eyes. "Stop," he said loudly, his voice cutting through the dinner conversation. "Just stop talking about our perfect family and how well we've handled everything." The table fell silent, everyone turning to look at Daniel with surprise. Michael reached across the table toward him, but Daniel pulled back. "You want to talk about honesty?" he continued, his voice rising. "Let's be honest about how I felt when I found out my entire childhood was based on a lie. Let's be honest about how it felt to discover that the person I trusted most in the world had been deceiving me every single day for 16 years. He stood up from his chair, towering over the table with all the righteous anger of a teenager who felt he had been wronged. "You talk about family and honesty like they go together, but you lied to me about the most basic thing about myself. You let me think I was someone I wasn't for my entire life." That's when he turned to me, his brown eyes blazing with hurt and fury that had been building for 3 years. "How could you do that to me?" he demanded. "How could you let me live a lie for so long?" Before I could respond, before I could try to explain or apologize or deflect, Daniel's hand came up and struck my cheek with a sharp crack that seemed to echo off the dining room walls. The entire table gasped. James half rose from his chair, and Michael started to stand to intervene. But I just smiled. It wasn't a calculated response or a strategic choice. The smile came from somewhere deep inside me, from a place of understanding and love that had taken 3 years of therapy and soul-searching to reach. Because in that moment, looking at my son's face twisted with pain and anger, I finally understood what I should have known all along. Daniel wasn't really angry about the lie itself. He was angry because the lie had made him question everything he thought he knew about love and family and belonging. He was angry because secrets had made him feel like an outsider in his own home. And most of all, he was angry because he was afraid that discovering the truth about his paternity meant that the love he had known his whole life wasn't real. So I smiled because I knew something that Daniel, in his teenage pain and confusion, couldn't yet see. I smiled because love isn't diminished by biology or strengthened by genetics. I smiled because Michael's love for Daniel had never wavered, not for a single moment, even after learning they weren't related by blood. I smiled because James's entrance into our lives had brought more love, not less, expanding our family rather than dividing it. Most of all, I smiled because I finally understood that the truth, even when it's painful and complicated and messy, is always better than the most carefully crafted lie. The secret I had kept to protect everyone had actually hurt them more than the truth ever could have. Daniel saw that smile and stepped back, confusion replacing the anger in his eyes. His hand, still raised from the slap, slowly lowered to his side. The entire table held its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. But all I could see was my son, this beautiful young man who carried the best parts of both his fathers and had grown into someone I was proud to call my child, regardless of the circumstances of his conception. "I'm sorry," I said simply, my voice carrying across the silent dining room. "I'm sorry for lying to you, for keeping the secret so long, and for making you question whether the love in this family is real. But Daniel, look around this table. Look at everyone here who loves you exactly as you are, exactly as you've always been. That love isn't less real because of biology. It's more real because we've all chosen it, every single day, even after knowing the truth." The silence stretched, for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Then Daniel's face crumpled, and the angry young man disappeared, replaced by the hurt child he had been trying to hide. I stood up and walked around the table, pulling him into my arms the way I had when he was small and needed comfort after a nightmare. This time, though, the nightmare was real, and it was one I had created. But as I held my son while he cried, into my shoulder, surrounded by a table full of people who loved him unconditionally. I finally understood that some nightmares can become the foundation for stronger dreams. Our family would never be the same as it was before the truth came out, but it could be something better. Honest, resilient, and built on love that had been tested and proven true. The rest of that Thanksgiving dinner was unlike any we had ever shared, filled with difficult conversations and honest emotions that we had all been holding back for too long. But it was also filled with a deeper connection than we had ever experienced before, the kind that only comes when people choose to love each other with full knowledge of each other's flaws and failures. As I looked around that table later that evening, watching Daniel laugh at something James had said while Michael squeezed my hand under the table, I realized that my smile in that moment of crisis had been more than just a reaction. It had been a choice, a decision to respond to pain with love instead of defensiveness, to meet anger with understanding instead of counterattack. That smile had changed everything, not because it was magical or perfect, but because it came from a place of truth and acceptance that I had taken years to find. It was the smile of a woman who had finally learned that protecting people from difficult truths doesn't actually protect them at all. It was the smile of a mother who had chosen to trust her son with honesty, even when it was painful for both of them. Most importantly, it was the smile of someone who had learned that families aren't defined by the circumstances of their creation, but by the love and commitment they choose to build together, day after day, through truth and lies, anger and forgiveness, slaps and smiles, until they become something stronger than any secret could ever tear apart. The weeks following that Thanksgiving dinner were unlike anything our family had ever experienced. Daniel and I began having conversations that felt more like careful negotiations between strangers than the easy chats we had shared for 16 years. He would approach me with questions at unexpected moments, his voice formal and distant, as if he were interviewing someone he barely knew rather than talking to his mother. "Tell me about the first time you held me," he said one evening while I was washing dishes. The question caught me off guard because it came without preamble or context, just a simple request for information about his own beginning. I dried my hands slowly, thinking about how to answer honestly without reopening wounds that were still too fresh. I told him about the snow falling outside the hospital window, about how his hair had been so much darker than either Michael's or mine, about the way he had gripped my finger with surprising strength for someone so small. What I didn't tell him was how terrified I had been in that moment, how I had searched his tiny face for traces of James while simultaneously praying. I wouldn't find any. "Did you love me right away?" he asked, his voice softer now, more vulnerable. This question pierced my heart because underneath it I could hear what he was really asking. Was I capable of loving him fully despite the circumstances of his conception? Despite the lie I had built around his existence? "Daniel," I said, turning, to face him completely. "I loved you before you were born. I loved you in spite of my mistakes, because of them and beyond them. You were never the problem. My choices were the problem." "Bye," he nodded slowly, processing this information with the seriousness he brought to everything these days. "Sometimes I wonder if I would have been different if I had known about James from the beginning," he said. "Like maybe I would have understood why I was good at art, or why I never felt like I fit perfectly into our family pictures." These conversations became a regular occurrence over the winter months. Daniel seemed to need to reconstruct his entire childhood through this new lens of knowledge, asking about specific memories and moments that had taken on different meanings now that he knew the truth. I answered every question as honestly as I could, even when the answers reflected poorly on my own judgment or character. Meanwhile, Michael and I were rebuilding our marriage from the ground up. Our counselor, Dr. Patricia Barnes, had warned us that this process would be more difficult than starting over with a new relationship, because we had to dismantle years of assumptions and habits while simultaneously trying to forgive and reconnect. Some days felt like progress, others like we were moving backward through quicksand. Trust isn't just about believing what someone tells you, Dr. Barnes explained during one particularly difficult session. It's about believing that they will consistently act in your best interest, even when it's hard for them. Sarah, you broke that trust not just by having an affair, but by making unilateral decisions about Michael's life and Daniel's life for 16 years. Michael struggled most with the timeline of the deception. He could intellectually understand my reasons for the initial lie, but the fact that I had maintained it for so many years, through family photos and birthday parties and bedtime stories, felt like a betrayal that was renewed daily. Every time I told Daniel he had my eyes or my stubborn streak, "You knew it wasn't true," he said during one session. "You let me build my entire identity as a father on a foundation that didn't exist." I had no defense for this accusation because it was absolutely accurate. I had watched Michael pour his heart into being Daniel's father while knowing that their connection was emotional rather than biological. The guilt was suffocating, but Dr. Barnes helped me understand that wallowing in guilt wouldn't repair the damage I had caused. "The question now," she said, "is whether you can build something new together that acknowledges the past without being defined by it." Spring arrived earlier than usual that year, and with it came an unexpected development. James called to ask if Daniel might be interested in spending part of his spring break in Colorado. His daughters, Rebecca and Emma, had been asking about their half-brother, and James thought it might be good for all the children to spend time together. The request sparked our first major disagreement since beginning counseling. Michael felt that Daniel was already dealing with enough changes and confusion without adding more family complications. I worried about Daniel feeling caught between his two fathers, trying to balance loyalties that shouldn't have to compete. Daniel himself seemed intrigued by the idea, but hesitant to express enthusiasm for fear of hurting Michael's feelings. "This is exactly the kind of situation we're going to face for the rest of our lives," Dr. Barnes pointed out. "Daniel has 2 fathers now, and both relationships are legitimate and important. The question is whether you can support what's best for him even when it feels uncomfortable for you." After several family meetings and individual conversations, we decided to let Daniel make the choice for himself. He opted to spend 4 days in Colorado over spring break, and Michael and I used that time to take our first weekend trip alone, together since the truth had come out. We drove to the Oregon coast, staying in a small bed and breakfast that we had visited during our early years of marriage. The goal was to rediscover each other outside the context of parenting and crisis management, to remember what had drawn us together before Daniel was even a possibility. It was awkward at first. We had spent so many months focused on healing and rebuilding that we had forgotten how to simply enjoy each other's company. Our conversations kept drifting back to Daniel or James or the therapy sessions, and we had to consciously redirect toward neutral topics like books we were reading or places we wanted to travel. On our second evening, as we walked along the beach at sunset, Michael stopped suddenly and took my hand. "I need to tell you something," he said, his voice serious enough to make my heart race. "I've been thinking about forgiveness, about what it really means, and whether I'm capable of it." I braced myself for another difficult conversation, but what he said next surprised me. "I forgive you for the affair," he said simply. "I understand why it happened, and I can see how desperate and lonely you were. That part makes sense to me now." I started to thank him, but he held up his hand to indicate he wasn't finished. "What I'm still struggling with is forgiving you for making me an unwitting participant in a lie for 16 years. Every time I helped Daniel with homework or taught him to throw a baseball or told him I was proud of him, I was living inside your deception without knowing it." His honesty was painful but necessary. I had been so focused on Michael's feelings about the affair that I hadn't fully considered how the prolonged deception had affected his sense of agency and identity as a father. "I don't know if I can forgive that part yet," he continued, "but I want to keep trying because I love the life we've built together, even if it was built on shaky ground." When Daniel returned from Colorado, he was buzzing with excitement about his half-sisters and the art studio that James had set up in his basement. He showed us photos on his phone of paintings he had created during his visit, landscapes and portraits that demonstrated a level of skill I had never seen from him before. "James says I have his eye for color composition," Daniel said, scrolling through the images. "And Rebecca is really good at photography. She wants to come visit us this summer and take pictures of Portland." I watched Michael's face carefully as Daniel talked about his time with James and his new sisters. There was pain there, but also something that looked like genuine happiness for Daniel's joy. When Daniel mentioned that James had offered to pay for private art lessons, Michael surprised me by suggesting we look into programs at the local art center. "If you're serious about developing this talent, we should make sure you have the best instruction available," Michael said. "Art might be your path to college scholarships." That evening, after Daniel had gone to bed, Michael and I sat on our back porch talking about the changes in our son. "He seems more confident," Michael observed, "more settled in his own skin." I agreed. There was something different about Daniel since his trip to Colorado, a sense of completeness that I hadn't realized he had been missing. "Maybe knowing James isn't taking anything away from your relationship with him," I suggested carefully. "Maybe it's adding something he needed." Michael nodded slowly. "I think I'm starting to understand that," he said. "Love isn't a zero-sum game. Daniel loving James doesn't mean he loves me less." As summer approached, we began planning for Rebecca's visit to Portland. She was 14, 2 years younger than Daniel, with James's artistic eye and her mother's organizational skills. The photos she sent ahead of her visit showed a serious young woman with an expensive camera and a portfolio of nature photography that was remarkably sophisticated for her age. Her visit coincided with Daniel's 17th birthday, and we decided to combine the celebrations into a larger family gathering. This time, the guest list included not just our extended family, but also James, his wife Carol, and both of his daughters. The planning process required careful coordination between multiple households and schedules, but it felt like a natural evolution of our expanding family structure. The party was held in our backyard on a warm July evening. I watched Daniel move between groups of relatives and friends, introducing Rebecca to his school friends, and showing Emma, James's younger daughter, how to use the telescope Michael had given him for his birthday. There was an ease to these interactions that had been missing from our Thanksgiving gathering, as if everyone had found their place in this new configuration. James and Michael had their longest conversation yet that evening, discussing Daniel's college plans and their shared commitment to supporting his artistic development. I overheard James telling Michael that Daniel spoke about him constantly during their phone calls, always with obvious love and respect. "You raised an incredible young man," James said sincerely. "I may have contributed DNA, but you contributed everything that matters." Michael's response was equally gracious. "He's got your creative spirit," he acknowledged. "I'm glad he has that connection to understand where it comes from." Later that night, as we cleaned up from the party, Daniel approached me with an envelope in his hands. "I wrote you something," he said, seeming nervous for the first time in weeks. "It's not an apology because I'm not sorry for being angry about the lies, but it's an explanation of where I am now." I took the envelope with trembling hands, recognizing the careful handwriting that had covered countless school assignments and birthday cards over the years. Inside was a letter written on Daniel's art paper, with small sketches decorating the margins. "Mom," it began, "I've been thinking about the story you told me about the first time you held me. You said you loved me in spite of your mistakes, because of them, and beyond them. I think I understand now what you meant by that. Your mistakes led to me existing, which I'm pretty grateful for. But they also led to a lot of pain for our family, which I'm still working through. The thing is, I'm starting to realize that every family has a story, and our story is complicated, but not shameful. I have two fathers who both love me completely. I have a mother who protected me the only way she knew how, even when her protection caused other problems. I have half-sisters who share my passion for art, and sisters who accept me as part of their family without question. I know you kept the truth from me because you were afraid of hurting me, but I want you to know that I'm not fragile. I can handle complicated truths better than I can handle simple lies. Going forward, can we agree to trust each other with the messy, difficult, real stuff? The letter continued for 2 more pages, outlining Daniel's thoughts about family, forgiveness, and the future. He wrote about his plans for college, his growing relationship with James and his daughters, and his deep appreciation for the stability that Michael had provided throughout his childhood. By the time I finished reading, tears were streaming down my face. Daniel had written with the wisdom of someone much older than 17, but also with the hope and optimism that made him uniquely himself. "Thank you," I whispered, pulling him into a hug. "Thank you for giving me the chance to earn your trust back." The rest of that summer passed in a blur of college visits, art portfolio preparation, and family gatherings that were becoming more natural and comfortable with each iteration. Daniel was accepted to several prestigious art programs, ultimately choosing a school in Seattle that would allow him to maintain close relationships with both his Portland and Colorado families. As we prepared for his departure to college that fall, I reflected on how completely our lives had changed since that explosive Thanksgiving dinner. The secret that had seemed so necessary to protect had nearly destroyed us when it finally came to light, but working through the aftermath had ultimately made us stronger and more honest with each other. Dr. Barnes helped us understand that we had essentially created a new family structure rather than repairing the old one. "You're not the same people who lived with that secret for 16 years, she explained. "You've had to rebuild your relationships from the ground up, with honesty as the foundation this time." Michael and I renewed our commitment to each other, but it was a different kind of marriage than we had before. We were more careful with each other's feelings, more intentional about communication, and more appreciative of the love we had nearly lost. The affair was part of our history now, but it no longer defined our present or our future. Daniel's relationship with James continued to develop in healthy ways. They shared a passion for art and creativity that enriched both their lives, but James was careful never to overstep his role or compete with Michael for Daniel's affection. The boundaries they established allowed Daniel to benefit from both relationships without feeling torn between them. The night before Daniel left for college, our family sat together on the back porch sharing memories and hopes for the future. Daniel talked about his plans to major in fine arts with a minor in art therapy, inspired by his own experience of healing through creative expression. "I want to help other people work through difficult family situations," he explained. "I think art can be a way to process emotions that are too complicated for words." As I listened to my son talk about his future, I realized that the crisis that had nearly destroyed our family had ultimately given him a deeper understanding of human nature and resilience. The lie I had told to protect him had hurt him, but working through that hurt had made him more empathetic and wise. The last major milestone of Daniel's senior year was graduation, where he was recognized as the recipient of several art scholarships and awards. Both Michael and James were in the audience, along with extended family from both sides. After the ceremony, we gathered for dinner at our favorite restaurant, a large, noisy group that spilled across multiple tables. During the dinner, Daniel stood up to make a speech. "I want to thank everyone who helped me get to this point," he began, his voice steady and confident. "My mom, who taught me that love is more important than perfection. My dad, Michael, who showed me what it means to be a good man through his actions every single day. My biological father, James, who helped me understand where my artistic abilities come from, and who welcomed me into his family with open arms." He paused, looking around the room at the faces of people who loved him. A few years ago, I thought I knew exactly who I was and where I came from. When I learned the truth about my parentage, I felt like my whole identity had been shaken. But now, I understand that identity isn't just about biology or even about the circumstances of your birth. It's about the love you receive, the values you learn, and the choices you make. The restaurant had grown quiet as other diners listened to this young man speak with such eloquence about family and identity. When he finished, there wasn't a dry eye at our tables, and several nearby diners actually applauded. That night, as we drove home from the restaurant, Michael reached over and took my hand. "We did something right," he said simply. "I don't know how, given everything that happened, but we raised an incredible human being." I squeezed his hand, thinking about the journey that had brought us to this point. The lie I had told 17 years earlier had caused immense pain, but it had also led to Daniel's existence and, ultimately, to a deeper understanding of what family really means. "He's going to be okay," I said, watching Daniel in the rear view mirror as he scrolled through congratulatory texts from his friends. "More than okay. He's going to help other people figure out how to be okay too." The summer before Daniel left for college was filled with preparations and family time. We took several trips together, including a visit to Colorado where Daniel could spend time with James and his daughters before heading to school. These trips felt natural now, part of the normal rhythm of our expanded family rather than special, occasions requiring careful planning and emotional preparation. During one of our last conversations before he left for Seattle, Daniel brought up the Thanksgiving dinner that had started our family's transformation. "I've been thinking about that day," he said as we sat in his nearly empty bedroom, surrounded by boxes packed for college. "I'm not proud of hitting you, but I'm glad it happened." I was surprised by this admission. "Why?" I asked. "Because it forced us to stop pretending everything was fine," he explained. We had been tiptoeing around the truth for months, having these careful conversations where we all said the right things, but nobody talked about how we really felt. When I lost my temper and hit you, it broke through all that politeness and made us deal with the real emotions. He was right, I realized. That moment of crisis had been necessary to clear the air and allow genuine healing to begin. My smile, in response to his slap, hadn't been calculated or strategic. It had been an instinctive recognition that his anger came from love, not hatred. "Your smile changed everything for me," Daniel continued. "I expected you to be angry or hurt or defensive. When you smiled instead, I realized that you understood why I was so upset. It made me feel heard in a way that words hadn't been able to do." As I helped Daniel load his belongings into the car for the drive to Seattle, I thought about how much we had all changed since that Thanksgiving afternoon. The secret that had shaped our family for so many years was now just one part of our story. No longer the defining element, but simply another thread in the complex tapestry of our relationships. Michael and I drove Daniel to college together, spending 2 days helping him settle into his dormitory and explore the campus. As we prepared to leave him there, I felt the familiar pang of parental separation anxiety, but it was tempered by pride in the young man he had become and confidence in his ability to navigate whatever challenges lay ahead. The drive home to Portland was quiet, both Michael and I lost in our own thoughts about this new phase of our lives. When we finally pulled into our driveway, the house felt enormous and echoing without Daniel's presence, filling it with music and laughter and the controlled chaos of teenage life. That evening, as we sat in our living room trying to adjust to the silence, Michael brought up something that had been on both our minds. "What do we do now?" he asked. "We've spent the last few years rebuilding our family, but now Daniel's gone and it's just us again." It was a good question, and one I had been pondering as well. Our marriage had been tested and strengthened by the crisis we had weathered together, but now we needed to rediscover who we were as a couple rather than just as Daniel's parents. I think we figure out how to be us again, I said finally. Not the people we were before Daniel was born, and not just the people we became because of the secret, but whoever we're supposed to be now. Michael nodded thoughtfully. I'd like that, he said. I'd like to get to know this version of you, the one who doesn't have to carry secrets or manage crises. I feel like I haven't met her yet. Over the following months, Michael and I did exactly that. We took up new hobbies together, traveled to places we had always wanted to see, and had long conversations about dreams and goals that extended beyond parenting. We also maintained our relationships with James and his family, who had become genuine friends rather than just connections through Daniel. Daniel thrived in college, sending us photos of his artwork and updates about his classes and new friendships. He visited home regularly, and we made trips to Seattle to see him perform in student art shows and exhibitions. James often joined these visits, and it became natural for all of us to celebrate Daniel's achievements together. The first Thanksgiving after Daniel left for college was a test of our new family dynamics. We decided to host again, inviting not just our traditional extended family, but also James, Carol, and their daughters. Daniel flew home from Seattle, excited to share his college experiences with everyone. As we gathered around the table that year, I looked at the faces of people who had become family through choice rather than blood, through forgiveness rather than convenience. The conversation was lively and warm, filled with laughter and genuine affection. Daniel regaled us with stories from his art classes and showed off sketches he had made of his college campus. At one point during the meal, Rebecca, James's older daughter, raised her glass of sparkling cider. "I want to make a toast," she announced, her voice carrying the confidence she had inherited from her father. "To complicated families and the love that makes them work anyway." We all raised our glasses, and I caught Daniel's eye across the table. He smiled at me, the same genuine smile that had helped heal our family 2 years earlier. In that moment, I understood that we had created something beautiful from the wreckage of my long-ago mistakes, something that was more honest and resilient than what we had before. Later that evening, as we cleaned up from dinner, Daniel pulled me aside. "Thank you," he said simply, "for finally telling me the truth, for letting me get to know James, and for showing me that families can be rebuilt even after they've been broken." I hugged him tightly, this young man who had taught me so much about forgiveness and resilience. "Thank you for giving us all the chance to become better people," I replied. As our guests prepared to leave that night, I realized that we had successfully navigated the second major Thanksgiving since the truth had come out. But this time, instead of crisis and confrontation, we had experienced joy and connection. The healing that had begun with Daniel's slap and my instinctive smile had come full circle, creating a new foundation for our family built on truth, acceptance, and unconditional love. Standing in my kitchen as the last dishes were put away, surrounded by the people who mattered most to me, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought us to this point. The road had been difficult and painful, but it had led us to a place of authenticity and connection that we never could have reached if the secret had remained buried. Our family would never be traditional or simple, but it was real in ways that our picture-perfect facade had never been. And sometimes, I reflected, the most beautiful families are the ones that have been broken and rebuilt with intention, care, and an abundance of hard-won love. 5 years had passed since Daniel graduated from college, and our family had settled into rhythms that would have been unimaginable during those dark days after the truth first emerged. Daniel had completed his degree in fine arts with a specialization in art therapy, just as he had planned, and was now working at a treatment center for adolescents dealing with family trauma. His own experience of navigating complex family dynamics had indeed prepared him to help others facing similar challenges. The irony wasn't lost on any of us that the crisis which had nearly destroyed our family had ultimately guided Daniel toward his life's calling. He often told us that his clients responded to him differently when he shared that he understood what it felt like to have your entire understanding of your family turned upside down. His willingness to be vulnerable about his own struggles gave hope to teenagers who felt like their situations were hopeless. Michael had been promoted to senior partner at his accounting firm, and we had used the financial stability to pursue some of the dreams we had put on hold during Daniel's childhood. We traveled more frequently now, taking trips to art museums in major cities where we could see exhibitions featuring artists whose techniques Daniel had studied. These journeys had become a way for us to stay connected to his passion, even as he built his independent adult life. James and Carol had moved to Portland the previous year, when James accepted a position as creative director for a major advertising agency. Their relocation had been motivated partly by James's desire to be closer to Daniel, but also because Rebecca, now 19 and studying photography at Portland State University, wanted to attend school near her half-brother. Emma, the youngest at 16, had integrated seamlessly into our extended family gatherings and had developed a close friendship with Michael despite their lack of biological connection. The house that had once echoed with emptiness after Daniel left for college was now frequently filled with the voices of young adults who treated our home as a gathering place. Rebecca and her photography friends often used our backyard for portrait sessions, while Emma had claimed a corner of Michael's home office for her digital art projects. Daniel brought colleagues from work to family dinners, and several of them had become regular fixtures at our table. This expansion of our family circle had happened organically, without the careful planning and emotional preparation that had characterized our early attempts to integrate James and his family into our lives. The young people who gathered in our home seemed to intuitively understand that family could be defined by choice and affection rather than biology, perhaps because their generation had grown up with more diverse family structures than previous ones. One particularly memorable evening in early October, I found myself cooking dinner for 12 people with no advance notice. Daniel had called from work to ask if he could bring a colleague who was having a difficult day. Rebecca had invited her study group to work on a project at our house, and Emma had asked if her boyfriend could join us for dinner. Michael had simply shrugged when I told him about our expanding guest list, suggesting we order pizza to supplement whatever I was making. As I watched this chaotic but joyful scene unfold in our kitchen and dining room, with young people sprawled across every available surface, working on laptops and art projects while engaging in animated conversations about everything from politics to pop culture, I was struck by how naturally leadership had emerged within this group. Daniel, despite being only 22, had become something of a mentor to several of the younger people, offering advice about college applications and career choices with the wisdom of someone who had navigated his own complex path to adulthood. Rebecca had inherited her father's eye for bringing out the best in people, organizing group activities, and ensuring that quieter individuals were included in conversations. Even Emma, still a teenager herself, showed remarkable emotional intelligence when one of Rebecca's friends began crying over a recent breakup, offering comfort and practical advice with a maturity that reminded me of Daniel at her age. The evening culminated with an impromptu talent show in our living room, with each person sharing something they were passionate about. We heard Rebecca's plans for a photography exhibition documenting Portland's street art, listened to Emma perform an original song she had written, and watched Daniel demonstrate art therapy techniques using simple drawing exercises that revealed surprising insights about personality and emotion. When it was Michael's turn, he surprised everyone by pulling out a guitar that I hadn't seen him touch in years and performing a song he had written about learning to redefine fatherhood. The lyrics spoke about the difference between biological connection and emotional bonds, about learning to love without ownership, and about the expansion of heart that comes from accepting unexpected additions to your family. As our impromptu guests prepared to leave that night, several of them made comments about how welcome they felt in our home and how much they enjoyed being part of our family gatherings. One of Daniel's colleagues, a young woman named Maria who had been working through her own complicated family relationships, pulled me aside to say that spending time with us had given her hope that families could heal from even the deepest wounds. That conversation stayed with me for days afterward, reinforcing my understanding of how our own journey had equipped us to offer something valuable to others facing similar challenges. The pain we had experienced and worked through had not been wasted. It had become a source of wisdom and compassion that we could share with people who needed to know that healing was possible. The holiday season that year brought its own set of milestones and celebrations. Daniel had been dating someone seriously for the first time since college, a fellow art therapist named Kevin, who shared his passion for using creativity to help people process trauma. Kevin had grown up in a traditional nuclear family and was initially somewhat overwhelmed by our extended family dynamics, but he adapted quickly and brought his own warmth and humor to our gatherings. James and Carol hosted Thanksgiving that year in their new Portland home, marking the first time since our crisis began that someone other than Michael and I had taken responsibility for organizing the major family holiday. The changing of hosting duties felt symbolic of how fully integrated our two families had become, no longer requiring careful orchestration, but functioning with the natural give and take of genuine extended family relationships. The dinner was a success beyond anything we could have imagined during those early, awkward attempts at blended family gatherings. The conversation flowed easily between generations and across biological lines, with James's mother, who had flown in from California, engaging in animated discussions with my parents about gardening techniques, while the younger generation debated the merits of various art schools and career paths. During the meal, Emma stood up to make an announcement that caught everyone by surprise. She had been accepted to a summer art program in Italy, an opportunity that would allow her to study Renaissance painting techniques while improving her Italian language skills. The scholarship she had received would cover most of the expenses, but she needed to raise additional funds for travel and living costs. Before she could even finish explaining her financial needs, offers of support began coming from around the table. James and Carol immediately offered to cover her airfare. My parents volunteered to contribute toward her living expenses, and Michael suggested organizing a fundraising exhibition featuring artwork from all the young artists in our extended family. But it was Daniel's response that moved me the most. He proposed that Emma document her experience in Italy through a combination of visual art and written reflections, with the goal of creating a book or exhibition that could be sold to support other young artists pursuing international study opportunities. His suggestion transformed Emma's individual opportunity into something that could benefit others facing similar dreams and financial constraints. The collaborative planning that followed Emma's announcement demonstrated how thoroughly our family had internalized the values of mutual support and shared responsibility. No one questioned whether they should help. The only discussion was about how to be most effective in making Emma's dream a reality while creating something meaningful for the broader community. As the evening wound down, I found myself standing in James and Carol's kitchen helping with dishes while listening to the continued conversations flowing from the dining room. Kevin was showing my father some photographs Daniel had taken during a recent art therapy workshop, while Rebecca and Emma made plans for a photography project documenting Emma's preparation for her Italian adventure. "This is what I imagined family could be like," Carol said quietly as we worked side by side at the sink. "Not perfect or simple, but real and supportive in all the ways that matter." Carol's comment resonated deeply with me because it captured something essential about the journey our family had taken. We had never achieved the picture-perfect ideal that I had tried to maintain during Daniel's childhood, but we had created something more valuable. A network of relationships based on authenticity, mutual respect, and unconditional love. The why. Weeks following Thanksgiving were filled with preparation for Emma's Italian adventure and planning for the holiday season. Daniel and Kevin had decided to spend Christmas with us in Portland before traveling to Kevin's family in Minnesota for New Year's, marking another milestone in the integration of new relationships into our established traditions. Christmas morning dawned cold and clear, with a dusting of snow that transformed our neighborhood into something resembling a holiday card. Our living room was filled with carefully wrapped presents and the comfortable chaos of a large family, gathering with conversation and laughter providing a soundtrack to the gift exchange. Daniel had created personalized artwork for each family member, pieces that reflected his understanding of their personalities and interests. My gift was a watercolor painting of our kitchen table surrounded by empty chairs, with the caption, "Where Love Gathers," written in his careful handwriting. The image captured not just the physical space where we shared meals, but the emotional significance of that table as the place where our family had been broken and rebuilt. Michael's gift from Daniel was a framed photograph of the two of them, from Daniel's college graduation, but Daniel had painted around the photo to include images representing their shared memories. A baseball glove from the countless hours Michael had spent teaching him to play catch. A stack of books representing the bedtime stories that had been such an important part of Daniel's childhood, and a graduation cap symbolizing Michael's pride in Daniel's academic achievements. The gifts Daniel created for James and his family were equally thoughtful and personal. For James, he had painted a portrait of hands working on a sculpture, representing the artistic legacy that James had passed down to him. Rebecca received a photograph that Daniel had taken of her at work during one of her photography sessions, but he had enhanced it with painted elements that highlighted her concentration and creative vision. Emma's gift was perhaps the most elaborate, a custom-designed journal for her Italian adventure, with Daniel's original artwork on every page providing prompts for both written reflections and sketched observations. The journal was clearly designed to help Emma document her experience in ways that would be meaningful both personally and artistically. As family members opened their gifts and shared reactions to Daniel's artwork, I was struck by how thoroughly he had captured the essence of each relationship in visual form. His pieces demonstrated not just artistic skill, but deep emotional intelligence and genuine affection for each person. The young man who had once felt uncertain about his place in our family had become someone who understood and celebrated the unique connections that bound us all together. The afternoon brought visitors from our broader community, friends and colleagues who had become part of our extended family circle over the years. Dr. Barnes, our family therapist, stopped by with her own family, having maintained a friendship with us long after our formal therapy sessions had ended. Several of Daniel's colleagues from the treatment center joined us for dinner, along with some of Rebecca's photography classmates and a few of Emma's high school friends. The house was filled to capacity, with people spilling into every room, and conversations happening simultaneously in multiple languages, as Emma practiced her Italian with one of Rebecca's friends who had studied abroad the previous year. Kevin's easy integration into this chaos impressed everyone, as he moved seamlessly between helping in the kitchen, engaging in serious discussions about art therapy techniques, and participating in the ongoing game of charades that had taken over the living room. As evening approached and our guests began to leave, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought us to this point. The secret that had once defined our family was now simply one thread in a much larger and more complex tapestry of relationships and experiences. Daniel's biological parentage was a fact that everyone knew and accepted, but it no longer carried the weight of crisis or shame that had once threatened to destroy us. The real transformation had been in our understanding of what family means. We had learned that love is not diminished by complexity, that trust can be rebuilt even after devastating betrayals, and that authenticity is more valuable than the appearance of perfection. Most importantly, we had discovered that families can be strengthened rather than weakened by expanding their boundaries to include new relationships and perspectives. That evening, as Michael and I cleaned up from our Christmas celebration, we talked about the year ahead and the changes it would bring. Emma would leave for Italy in the summer. Rebecca would graduate from college and begin her career as a professional photographer. And Daniel was considering applying for a graduate program that would allow him to expand his work in art therapy. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had told the truth from the beginning? Michael asked as we loaded the dishwasher with the accumulated plates and glasses from our day of celebration. It was a question I had pondered many times over the years, and my answer had evolved as my understanding of our situation had deepened. I think Daniel would have grown up with less confusion about his identity, I said finally. But I also think the crisis we went through made all of us stronger and more intentional about our relationships. Michael nodded thoughtfully. I used to think that the lie was the worst thing that happened to our family, he said. But now I wonder if it was actually the catalyst for something better than what we had before. His observation captured something I had been feeling but hadn't been able to articulate. The deception that had nearly destroyed us had also forced us to examine our assumptions about love, loyalty, and family bonds. Working through the aftermath had required us to be more honest with each other than we had ever been before, creating a foundation of communication and trust that was stronger than anything we had built on the unstable ground of my original lie. The new year brought fresh challenges and opportunities for growth. Emma's preparation for her Italian adventure became a family project, with everyone contributing their expertise to help her succeed. James worked with her on portfolio development. Rebecca taught her photography techniques for documenting her travels, and Daniel helped her develop strategies for managing the emotional challenges of being far from home for an extended period. Michael surprised everyone by volunteering to help Emma navigate the financial and logistical aspects of international travel, drawing on skills from his accounting background that proved invaluable in managing currency exchange, international banking, and tax implications of her scholarship. His involvement in Emma's planning demonstrated how fully he had embraced his role as a father figure to all the young people in our extended family, regardless of biological relationships. The fundraising exhibition that Daniel had proposed became a community event that exceeded all our expectations. Local artists donated pieces for auction, community members volunteered to help with organization and promotion, and the event raised enough money not only to support Emma's Italian adventure, but also to establish a small scholarship fund for other young artists pursuing international study opportunities. The opening night of the exhibition was held at Chi, a downtown gallery that Rebecca had secured through her photography connections. The event brought together our entire extended family along with dozens of community members who had been touched by our story in various ways. Dr. Barnes attended with several of her colleagues, curious to see how our family's healing journey had evolved into community engagement. As I watched people moving through the gallery, examining artwork, and reading the stories of young artists who had benefited from international study opportunities, I was amazed by how our personal journey had expanded to touch so many other lives. The pain that had once felt so isolating and shameful had been transformed into something that could offer hope and practical support to others facing their own challenges. Daniel gave a short speech during the exhibition opening, talking about the relationship between personal healing and community service. He spoke about how working through his own family's crisis had prepared him to help other young people navigate complex emotional terrain, and how art had been both a tool for processing difficult emotions and a bridge for connecting with others. Art therapy works because it allows people to express things that are too complicated or painful for words, he explained to the gathered crowd. But it also works because it creates connections between people who might otherwise feel isolated by their experiences. When we share our stories through creative expression, we discover that we're not alone in our struggles. His words resonated with many people in attendance, and several approached him afterward to share their own stories of family challenges and healing. I watched these conversations with pride and amazement, seeing how the young man who had once felt so lost and angry had grown into someone capable of offering guidance and hope to others. The success of the exhibition led to ongoing community connections that enriched all our lives. Daniel was invited to speak at conferences about the intersection of art therapy and family systems work. Rebecca began documenting other families, healing journeys through photography, and Emma started volunteering with programs that helped young artists access educational opportunities. Michael and I found ourselves increasingly involved in supporting other families dealing with complex dynamics and unexpected revelations. Dr. Barnes referred several clients to us for informal mentoring, and we began hosting monthly gatherings where people could share their experiences and learn from each other's journeys. These community connections reinforced our understanding that our own experience, while painful, had equipped us with valuable insights that could benefit others. The shame that had once surrounded our family's crisis had been transformed into a source of strength and wisdom that we could offer to people facing similar challenges. As Emma's departure date for Italy approached, our family focused on creating send-off celebrations that would strengthen her connections to home while preparing her for the independence she would need abroad. We organized a series of small gatherings where she could spend focused time with each family member, collecting advice, sharing memories, and making plans for staying in touch during her months away. The evening before Emma's departure, we held a quiet family dinner that included only our closest circle: Michael and me, Daniel and Kevin, James and Carol, Rebecca, and Emma herself. The conversation was both celebratory and poignant, filled with excitement about Emma's opportunities and sadness about the temporary separation her absence would create. During the meal, Emma presented each family member with a small piece of artwork she had created specifically for them, explaining that she wanted to leave something personal with everyone before beginning her adventure. Her gifts demonstrated the same thoughtfulness and emotional intelligence that Daniel had shown in his Christmas presents, reflecting her deep understanding of each relationship and its unique significance. For me, Emma had created a delicate watercolor painting of birds in flight, with a handwritten note explaining that it represented her gratitude for the way our family had shown her that it was possible to soar even after experiencing turbulence. The metaphor was both beautiful and apt, capturing something essential about the journey we had all taken together. Michael's gift was a small sculpture made from materials Emma had collected during family outings over the years: smooth stones from beach trips, pieces of driftwood from hiking adventures, and pressed flowers from our garden. The assembled piece created an abstract representation of stability and growth, reflecting Emma's appreciation for the steady foundation Michael had provided in her life. Daniel and Kevin received a collaborative piece that Emma had designed, specifically for their relationship. A photograph of hands working together on an art project, enhanced with painted elements that highlighted the complementary strengths they brought to their partnership. The piece celebrated not just their romantic relationship, but their shared commitment to using creativity for healing and connection. James and Carol's gift was perhaps the most emotionally complex: a portrait of hands passing a paintbrush from one generation to the next, representing the artistic legacy that had shaped Emma's development, and that she was now carrying forward into her own creative journey. The piece acknowledged both gratitude for past guidance and determination to forge her own artistic path. Rebecca received a photograph that Emma had taken of her sister at work, but enhanced with painted elements that transformed the image into something resembling a Renaissance portrait. The artistic treatment reflected Emma's appreciation for Rebecca's role as both sister and mentor, someone who had modeled how to pursue creative passions with dedication and integrity. As family members examined their gifts and shared reactions, the conversation naturally turned to the ways that creative expression had become central to our family's identity and healing process. We talked about how art had served as both a catalyst for crisis when Daniel's genetic heritage became apparent through his artistic abilities, and as a tool for resolution when creative expression helped us all process and communicate complex emotions. Emma's departure the next morning was tearful but hopeful, with the entire family gathering at the airport to see her off. As we watched her disappear through the security checkpoint, wheeling her suitcase and carrying the art supplies that would document her Italian adventure, I felt a complex mixture of pride, sadness, and excitement for the experiences that awaited her. The months that followed Emma's departure brought regular updates through video calls, emails, and social media posts that allowed us to follow her progress and share in her discoveries. Her documentation of the experience proved to be as thoughtful and insightful as Daniel had predicted, combining visual art with written reflections that captured both the practical details of international study and the emotional growth that came from navigating independence in a foreign culture. Meanwhile, our family life continued to evolve in her absence. Daniel and Kevin made the decision to move in together, finding an apartment that included studio space where they could both pursue their artistic interests while building their life as a couple. Their relationship had become a source of stability and joy for both of them, and watching them navigate the practical and emotional aspects of domestic partnership reminded me of the early days of my own marriage to Michael. Rebecca completed her final semester of college with a photography exhibition that documented the experiences of young people from non-traditional families, including several portraits of our own family members and friends. Her work received recognition from local art critics and led to offers for commercial photography assignments that would allow her to support herself as a professional artist immediately after graduation. James and Carol settled into their new life in Portland with obvious contentment, hosting regular gatherings that brought together their California friends with their new Pacific Northwest community. James's work at the advertising agency was going well, and Carol had found volunteer opportunities with local arts organizations that utilized her background in nonprofit management. Michael and I used the quieter pace of our empty nest years to deepen our own relationship and explore interests that we had put aside during Daniel's childhood. We took cooking classes together, joined a hiking group that explored trails throughout the Pacific Northwest, and began planning a major trip to Europe that would allow us to visit Emma in Italy while exploring art museums and cultural sites that had been on our wish list for years. The trip to Europe became a defining experience for our marriage, allowing us to rediscover each other as travel companions and fellow adventurers, rather than just co-parents managing family logistics. We spent 3 weeks exploring museums in Paris, hiking trails in Switzerland, and finally reaching Florence, where Emma met us for a joyful reunion that included tours of the art studios where she had been studying Renaissance techniques. Seeing Emma in her Italian environment was a revelation. She had grown more confident and independent during her months abroad, speaking Italian with increasing fluency and navigating the cultural differences with adaptability that impressed both Michael and me. Her artwork had evolved as well, incorporating techniques and perspectives that reflected her immersion in a different artistic tradition. The week we spent with Emma in Italy included visits to museums and historical sites, but also quiet time together in cafes and piazzas where we could simply enjoy each other's company without the distractions of busy American life. These conversations revealed how much Emma had grown during her time away, not just as an artist, but as a young woman developing her own perspectives on life, relationships, and creativity. Our return to Portland coincided with the beginning of a new academic year, bringing fresh energy and opportunities to our community. Daniel had been accepted to the graduate program he had applied for, beginning coursework that would prepare him for expanded roles in art therapy and family systems work. Rebecca had secured her first major photography assignment, documenting a local nonprofit's work with refugee families, a project that would allow her to combine her artistic skills with social justice advocacy. The autumn months brought their own rhythm of family gatherings and community events, but now, with the added dimension of Emma's Italian experience enriching our conversations and perspectives, her video calls from Florence had become appointment viewing for the entire family, with everyone gathering to hear her latest adventures and see her newest artwork. As Thanksgiving approached once again, we found ourselves planning a celebration that would include not just our core family, but also the expanded community of friends and chosen family that had developed around us over the years. The guest list included familiar faces like Dr. Barnes and her family, Daniel's colleagues from work, Rebecca's photography friends, and several of the families we had met through community outreach efforts. Emma arranged to return from Italy just in time for Thanksgiving, eager to share her experiences in person and to contribute dishes she had learned to prepare during her months abroad. Her homecoming was emotional for everyone, but particularly meaningful for Rebecca, who had missed her sister more than she had anticipated. The Thanksgiving celebration that year felt like a culmination of everything our family had learned about love, acceptance, and community building. The conversation around our table included multiple languages as Emma shared Italian phrases and stories, diverse perspectives as friends from various cultural backgrounds contributed their own family traditions, and multiple generations as children, who had become part of our extended family, played alongside adults who had found healing and connection through our community gatherings. During the meal, Daniel stood up to make a toast that captured the significance of the moment. 6 years ago, this family was shattered by secrets and lies, he began, his voice carrying easily across the crowded room. Today, we're celebrating not just our healing, but the family we've built that extends far beyond blood relationships or legal connections. He gestured around the table at the faces of people who had become family through choice and commitment rather than biology or marriage. We've learned that love is stronger than deception, that truth is more valuable than comfort, and that families can grow and change and become more beautiful than they were before crisis struck. The toast was met with applause and raised glasses, but also with the kind of quiet recognition that comes when people hear their own experiences reflected in someone else's words. Many of the people gathered at our table had their own stories of family crisis and healing, their own journeys through pain toward greater authenticity and connection. As the evening progressed and conversations continued in small groups throughout our house, I found myself thinking about the journey that had brought us to this point. The lie I had told 22 years earlier had caused immense pain, but it had also led to discoveries about resilience, forgiveness, and the true meaning of family that we never could have achieved through easier paths. The slap that Daniel had delivered at our Thanksgiving table 6 years earlier had been a moment of crisis, but it had also been a moment of truth that broke through years of careful politeness and forced us all to confront our real emotions. My smile in response hadn't been strategic or calculated. It had been an instinctive recognition that his anger came from love and that our family was strong enough to survive honest expressions of pain. Looking around at the faces of people who had chosen to be part of our family's ongoing story, I understood that we had created something more valuable than the picture-perfect facade I had once tried to maintain. We had built a community based on authenticity, mutual support, and the understanding that love grows stronger when it's tested and proven true. The years ahead would bring their own challenges and changes. Emma would complete her studies in Italy and return to begin her own career as an artist. Rebecca would continue building her photography business while exploring opportunities to document stories of healing and resilience. Daniel would finish his graduate studies and expand his work helping other families navigate complex dynamics and unexpected revelations. Michael and I would continue growing together as partners, parents, and community members, using the wisdom we had gained through our own journey to support others facing similar challenges. James and Carol would remain integral parts of our family constellation, their presence enriching rather than complicating our relationships. But whatever challenges lay ahead, I was confident that we were equipped to handle them with honesty, compassion, and the kind of love that had been tested by crisis and proven strong enough to survive and thrive. The family that had been broken by secrets had been rebuilt on a foundation of truth, creating something more beautiful and resilient than what had existed before. As our Thanksgiving guests prepared to leave that evening, many of them lingered to share final conversations and exchange contact information, evidence of the genuine connections that had formed around our table. The house that had once echoed with emptiness now resonated with the voices of people who had found belonging and healing in our expanding circle of chosen family. Standing in my kitchen as the last dishes were cleaned and put away, surrounded by the people who mattered most, to me, I felt overwhelming gratitude for the journey that had brought us to this point. The road had been difficult and painful, but it had led us to a place of authenticity and connection that was worth every step we had taken to reach it. The smile that had changed everything 6 years earlier had come from a place of understanding and love that took years of healing to develop. It represented my recognition that families aren't defined by perfection or simplicity, but by their willingness to work through difficulties together and emerge stronger on the other side. Our story would continue to evolve, bringing new challenges and celebrations, new relationships, and opportunities for growth. But the foundation we had built through crisis and healing would provide the stability we needed to navigate whatever lay ahead. Secure in the knowledge that love, when it's authentic and intentional, can overcome even the deepest wounds and create something beautiful from the most unlikely circumstances. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.